what you know.
Right.
Keep them poor. So my father was the head of education, PhD, all that stuff. I go home and ask him, said, why don't we learn about money in school? And he looked at me and says, because the government doesn't let us teach that subject. The government tells us what we can teach and what we can't teach. And I thought that was strange. And I said, but aren't we going to school to learn about money? He says, no, your job is to get a job. I said, but you get a job to earn money. He goes, no, you're supposed to just get a job. I went, no. Isn't the purpose of a job to earn money? He goes, you're correct. I said, so why don't I just learn about money? I can skip the job part, you know? And he got flustered and he said, if you want to learn about money, why don't you ask your best friend's father about money? And I said, why? That's Mike. So why ask him? He says, because Mike's father is an entrepreneur. And I said, what are you? He says, I'm an employee. I'm a government employee. I went, oh, what's the difference? He says, the difference is an entrepreneur must know about money, or they're no longer entrepreneurs. And he says an employee doesn't have to know anything about money, because the government will take care of them, the company will take care of them. So I'm all confused. But I took my dad's advice and I trundled over to Mike's father's office and knocked on his door and I said, hey, I'm here, 9 years old. Teach me about money. He says, beat it, kid, you know. But that's where the story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad started. And finally, through persistence, my rich dad started teaching me about money on one condition. And that condition was he would never pay me. He says, the moment I pay you, you think like an employee. He says, that's the trap. Entrepreneurs work for free. And now I'm 9 years old, my head's cracking in half. He says, you never want a paycheck. You understand that, kid? I said, okay, I got it. And he says, well, how do I make money? He says, that's what entrepreneurs figure out. He was like, so how do I learn about money? So he would just break out a Monopoly game board. So I would work for free. I'd pick up cigarette butts and he had hotels and restaurants and I would clean and do menial tasks. And as I got older, I started getting into office work and marketing and accounting, and I was an apprentice basically, but I always worked for free. And he would teach me about money, but the way he taught me about money was playing Monopoly. And finally one day I got upset. I said, well, when are you going to teach me about money? He says, what do you think we're doing? We're playing Monopoly. He goes, no. What do you think we're doing? We're playing Monopoly. He says, what do you think we're doing? So I don't know. I'm teaching you about money. And then that's when, you have one greenhouse. He says, there's many formulas for great success in money. There's thousands of them, but one of the best ones is found on the game of Monopoly. It still is today. 4 greenhouses, 1 red hotel. I said, what? He says, one of the greatest ways to acquire great wealth is playing Monopoly in real life. 4 greenhouses, 1 red hotel. Is that all there is? He goes, that's it. And he says, what do you think I'm doing? And I went, I don't know. So then he took me out and he showed me his greenhouses. And 10 years later, when I was 19, I was now in school in New York, and I come back to Hawaii, and Rich Dad had bought the biggest piece of land smack dab in the middle of Waikiki Beach. And when you go to Waikiki Beach today, you'll see the Hyatt Regency Hotel. That was his hotel.
Just like the game of Monopoly.
Just like the game of Monopoly.
Acquired assets and they became bigger assets.
He just kept what's called an assemblage, because that property wasn't that big at the time. So he had to buy out all the small guys. Because Waikiki was a little dirt water little town. So he'd buy out this shop owner and buy that shop owner. And it took him a while, but he finally assembled this large piece of property. And then he and Hyatt put up this giant hotel. It just sold for $800 million. So that's how I learned about money. I've had financial crashes. I've had people stab me in the back, but they're all good because I grow from it. That's spirituality. People who are afraid of making mistakes, like they teach in school, they don't ever grow. because spirituality is there's good and there's bad, there's right and there's wrong, there's up and there's down. Most people only want to be right, they only want to be positive. Well, you can't have that. That's not reality. Well, I wasn't poor by most people's standards, but I came from a family with a poor attitude, if you know what I mean. Because rich, poor, middle class, poverty starts with a fundamental attitude. Poverty is passed on. It's taught in your families. And middle class is taught in families. And so the people right now who are sitting at home, who are struggling financially or worried about money or unhappy, they may be making a lot of money, but unhappy with what they're doing, it was probably taught to you. You know, your superego was taught, get a job, work hard, or you'll never be rich, or the rich are evil, or whatever. The school system will never teach you about money. The school system was designed to teach you to be an employee, which is important, or a doctor or a lawyer, a specialist, but never about money. And what most people lack is real business knowledge, like accounting, like debt, like taxes. You gotta know that stuff, but they don't teach it in school to anybody. So, and then when people ask me, how did your rich dad learn this when your poor dad, a PhD, didn't? And the answer is very simply, my rich dad, who's my best friend's father, his father died when he was 13. So rich dad had this family business at 13 to run. So he had to drop out of school, which was his blessing. There's blessings, and sometimes the blessing doesn't look like a blessing, but it turned out to be a blessing. And then his teachers became his bookkeeper, his accountant, his attorney, his banker, his real estate agents. So he has what I call real teachers, not these fake teachers in school. You see, most teachers in school, they're out of ethics. They teach subjects they themselves don't practice. I asked the teacher, I said, I'm in my third year of calculus now. It was called strength of materials. I said, am I ever going to use this stuff? He goes, no. I said, why do you teach it? Because I get paid. I said, do you ever use it? He goes, no. And that's why, you have to, in life, one of the things I suggest to people, you got to find a real teacher versus a fake teacher. And a fake teacher is somebody who doesn't do what they teach. And a real teacher is doing what they teach every day. So my accountants, my attorneys, they're in it every single day. That's how I learn, because every day I'm solving problems in my business. So I have accountants and attorneys and bankers and all these people on speed dial because I'm solving problems with my team.
I see you giving this knowledge out, and
yeah.
Do the rich people cringe and say, don't tell them that, Rob?
Yes. Don't tell people what you know. Right. Keep them poor. But, unfortunately, the poor, as was in the Bible, I'm not real religious, the poor will always be amongst us because it starts up here. Right,
it's that fear mentality.
It's in their words, and the words become flesh. Again, I'm not really religious. I flunked out of Sunday school also. But when they say I can't afford it or I can't do that, they go down. They become what they say. My PhD daddy says, what do you think I am, made of money? I can't afford that. And my rich dad would say, that's why he's poor. Poor people say, I can't afford it, I can't do that, I don't have time. Because it's an escape. It's an escape, you know what I mean? It's easy to say, I can't afford it.
And your rich dad used to say what instead of, I can't afford it?
How can I afford it? How can I do that? What would it take, or why should I do that? He says that a question opens the mind, a statement closes the mind. See, when you say, I can't afford it, your mind shuts down, and you become what you say. Rugby is a team sport, but so is soccer. The rules are different. And other people are golfers. They play by themselves. And so everybody's different. So my game financially is business, number one. Second is real estate. So what I say to young people is, you find your game.
accustomed to keeping things in the fog in general, you're going to keep yourself in the fog with regards to your investments, because in some sense everything you do is an investment, right? I mean, some of it's quantified in monetary terms, but you're always investing in one manner or another. And so I think if your character has been disrupted by your persistent attempts to deceive yourself about the nature of reality, you're going to be a financial train wreck. And I mean, I've certainly seen that in my clinical practice. I've seen people burn through amounts of money that you wouldn't think someone could burn through in that short a period of time because of self-deceptive blindness. If you have a high IQ and you're conscientious, which is another trait, then you're more likely to be financially successful, say, by the time you're in middle age. And so that looks like two temperamental traits whose presence enables you to beat randomness over time. So those traits work very well in this society at this time, but you can also argue that that's also a matter of chance, because there wouldn't be unconscientious people if at some point in the past unconscientiousness hadn't aided their survival. So what constitutes beating a system depends on the parameters that you put around the system. And you can think the same thing about, well, look at how successful he is. Okay, you mean financially. All right, so then, well, how's his health? How's his marriage? How are his relationships with his children? What price did he pay for his wealth? Like as you add dimensions of evaluation, whether that particular person won or lost might not be so self-evident. Well, they gamble partly because it's fun. And I mean that technically. Most of the neurochemicals that your brain produces that are associated with the kind of pleasure that people really like, which is like, for example, the kind of pleasure that drugs like cocaine produce, are produced by risky behavior that has the potential for high return. We like that sort of thing. And people are wired so that they're more responsive to the probability of something good happening than even to the good thing. So, for example, we know that if people win the lottery, a year later they're about the same as they were. No better, no worse. So, actually winning all that money has a limited long-term impact on their happiness. That's probably more determined by their trait temperament. But the lead up to the good event, that's the exciting part. It might happen, it might happen. That's excitement. And that's produced by, gambling will produce that, especially for some people, because some people are really susceptible to that kind of reward. Everyone's susceptible to it to some degree, and that can be manipulated, and that's what slot machines do. Slot machines manipulate the human propensity to engage in a certain kind of gambling behavior. And why do people gamble? Sometimes taking a risk really pays off. And not taking a risk is also a risk. So there's no way out of risk. It's gamble one way or another. Just like a lottery ticket winner. What are they paying for? They're paying for the fun that's associated with the anticipation of the reward. And the brain, your emotional brain, isn't that great at calculating mathematical probabilities. And so it sort of says, some chance. You have some chance of winning $50 million. Well, it might be 1 in 380 million, but your anticipation system isn't a mathematical system. It just says, well, you have some chance. That's a lot more than none. Well, in some ways, it's infinitely more than none, because at zero, you have no chance, and with one ticket, you have some chance. So that gets the old excitement going. You can say a life without risk is hardly worth having. It might be secure, although it isn't, because, as I said, not taking a risk also constitutes a risk. And when you look back, people often are more upset about the things they didn't do, the chances they didn't take, than the failures that they encounter. Now, not always, obviously, it depends on the failure. But, you can sit at home encased in styrofoam and have your meals delivered. And you're probably, you're not going to get mugged, probably. But what's a hell of a life? Men are more aggressive. Men have more testosterone than women. And men are more aggressive than women. And along with that aggression comes a greater propensity to take risks. And so you see this, the best example of that, really the best example is, and the best proof of it, is the fact that there are way more male criminals than female criminals. Way more. And usually if you get a female criminal, she's tangled up with some guy that dragged her along. I mean, not always, obviously, but it's like 10 to 1. So yeah, men take more risks. There are more great successes among men and more catastrophic failures. And that's the case in most of the sexually active animal kingdom. Men are relatively more expendable. So here's an example. More than twice as many of your ancestors are female than male. Because on average, almost every woman has one child. Whereas many, many men have none, and some have a lot, like really a lot. I think they estimate that Genghis Khan's genes are present in something like 30% of the Asian population. So there's massive mating success differential among men. And that also inclines them to take risks, because you can be fantastically successful genetically as a male, although you can fail absolutely, whereas with a woman can be moderately successful. So, people have tried to define what constitutes optimal health or optimal performance in a system or a person in a bunch of different ways. You can say, well, deviation from the average is pathological, but we don't think about that with talent or beauty or intelligence. So as a general principle, that can't be right. Some people have said for mental health that a system is unhealthy when it deviates from its evolutionary function. Well, I don't buy that, because it's very difficult to specify the evolutionary function of all sorts of things. So that just doesn't solve the problem for me. What seems to happen, as far as I can tell, is that things are useful up to a certain point, and once they dominate, and sort of like the Cyclops image, with the Cyclops only seeing one thing. If you get too single-minded about anything, any virtue, or any behavior for that matter, it hits a point where it starts to turn back on itself, and then you've gone too far. And when it turns back on itself, it hits what's technically called a positive feedback loop, and then the thing spirals out of control catastrophically and unpredictably. And I can give you some examples of that. So let's say you start to get depressed. Okay, and maybe you're slowly getting more and more depressed. Well, there's going to be a tipping point, or there often is a tipping point, where you're so depressed, you quit going to work and you lose your job. Well, that's not so good for your depression, because now you're not only depressed, you're unemployed, and you don't have any money. Well, and then maybe, your wife is getting pretty tired of having to deal with you because you're depressed, and now you also don't have a job, and the stress is too much for her, and so you fight a lot, and that makes you more depressed. And then you start to stay at home because you don't really want to show your face in public, so you lose all your friends, and man, it's a cliff. So you're doing not too bad, even though it might be a downhill walk, until you hit this single event, and then it just goes whomp. Because being unemployed makes you more depressed, and that makes it less likely that you're going to look for a job. And with alcoholism, and other forms of addiction, what seems to happen to me is that you hit the positive feedback loop point when you start using the drug to cure its own withdrawal symptoms. So you're not in trouble with cocaine until you start using it because the cocaine has made you feel bad in the withdrawal. Same with alcohol. You're all shaky and you got the shakes and so on, and you figure out one day, Jesus, shot of vodka, I'm good. Yeah. No. You're firmly in the grip of the devil at that point. And I think a lot of systems are like this. They work fine, but as they get more and more exaggerated, they get closer and closer to a tip-off point, and then the tip-off point is where all hell breaks loose. And virtues are even like that. So we know, for example, that conscientiousness is a trait, and conscientious people are industrious and orderly. So it's like the Protestant work ethic. Okay, we also know that orderliness is grounded in disgust sensitivity. Okay, we know that orderly people on average have better hygienic habits and they live longer, but they're also more inclined to radically disapprove of homosexual behavior. They're also more anti-foreigner because they have a real tight me, not me discrimination system, and they're disgusted by what's not me. Well, that's good. You don't like dirt. And you can be sure that among our forefathers, it was very frequent if you were an explorer and you went out to meet a bunch of strangers, you and your whole damn crew were dead 3 weeks later because they gave you some disease you have no resistance to whatsoever, and it just wiped you out. I mean, that's what happened to the Native Americans, and it wiped out 95% of them. This is a deadly thing. Anyways, as orderliness increases in its intensity, it starts to shade into like vicious intolerance. So the fascists, for example, the Nazis, were orderly. They didn't like parasites, and they thought of anything that wasn't just like them. Their corporate body, the Aryans, was a parasite and it should be eradicated. That's a pretty good idea when you're eradicating parasites. I mean, Hitler tried to get rid of tuberculosis to begin with. But then the question arises, what's a parasite? At some point, it's like everyone who isn't meat. And, Hitler got to that point before he died because he felt that the whole German society, he lost faith in the Aryan society as the war was being lost. And he was perfectly happy that the bloody place went up in fire, which is a purifying element. So, look, conscientiousness is virtuous. But you take any virtue too far, off the cliff you fall. So there's like this range within which something works, and when you push it past that range, it starts to feed on itself and it turns into some variant of hell. So enthusiasm can easily get out of control. That's what happens when a party gets out of control. That's what happens. Enthusiasm makes people impulsive. It makes them discount the future because today is so great. Enthusiasm turns into mania. And so, everybody says, well, you should be happy. You should be feeling positive affect all the time. It's like, no, wrong. Positive affect is dangerous. You're always telling your kids to stop being so happy. You don't notice it, but they're running around causing trouble. They're having a wild time. They're throwing their arms in the air and they're laughing and they're running around. They're having fun. You say, hey, quiet down. And if you count your disciplinary actions, you'd be shocked at how often what you're doing is telling your children to stop having so much fun. It's disruptive. And what happens too if you let your kids have fun out of control? Sooner or later, one of them bangs their head on a table or falls down the stairs or gives another kid a poke or, it will, or breaks something or, it isn't just that it bothers people. It's that it's Dionysian danger. It's orgiastic danger. You get too enthusiastic about things, you get into trouble. It's not negative emotion that drives teenage pregnancy. It's impulsive positive emotion. Right. The problem is, and this actually speaks to what people are like, benefit is finite and risk is infinite. You can die. You can only be so happy. You can be really happy. Yeah. You can be just 100% dead. And you're actually kind of wired that way because people are more sensitive to negative events than to positive events. So a loss will hurt you more than a gain of the same magnitude will please you. So the reason I'm saying that is because it shows you that we're actually set up for a risky world. Our nervous systems are tuned to be more sensitive to negative information because the world's so damn risky. Now, we'd be completely hiding like a nocturnal animal, except that, we figured out ways to make risk valuable. So we're ambivalent creatures. We're thrilled by opportunity and terrified by it at the same time, which is exactly how it should be. Risk is everywhere. That's the first truth of Buddhism, right? Suffering is inevitable. Life is suffering. Same thing. Risk is everywhere. Life is suffering. Period. So, partly when you're saying, well, can you regulate the collapse of these macro systems? You're saying, well, can you eliminate risk? Well, no, you can't. I don't think. In fact, you could argue, I shouldn't say that exactly. I think there is one way that you can minimize risk. Don't be crooked. The less crooked your society is, the more you mitigate risk, but you can't eliminate it.